I'm Rob Licuria, Senior Editor at Gold Derby, here with Glenn Garland, Editor on Peacock's hit new series, Poker Face. Glenn, Poker Face is quite genre-bending. It tonally shifts between broad comedy and heartfelt dramatic moments and suspense thriller. Does this present any unique challenges for you as the editor?
Absolutely. When we first started working on it, the various editors and I would talk about it, because before we started working with Rian Johnson, we would end up realizing that some episodes, like you said, are much more dark and thriller based, and other ones were really light and fun and funny. And so we were wondering whether we needed to sort of pull back some of the more elevated sequences, or whether we wanted to maybe make the thriller stuff a little less dark. And when we started working with Ryan's like, I want us to lean into it. I want each episode to feel like it's almost unique in and of itself. So it was really fun to go, okay, the night shift, the episode 2 that I did, is much darker than, for instance, Rest in Metal episode 4, which is very fun. And you've got these musicians doing crazy things, and you've got this amazing performance from the drummer who's just all over the place. So it was really interesting leaning into that and going for that. And so hearing from Rian that we don't have to worry about keeping it all the same was helpful. Now, that was something that Rian just had in his gut. People are going to go for this ride, even if one episode is very different than the other episode, because Natasha is so good and she's really on every time. So she's the through line, and she anchors each episode. So you can go in these different places and have her and her personality and her character sort of help us feel settled in the episode.
Yeah, you are so on, and Ryan was right. That was a very smart thing to do, because
it was.
If the tone was the same throughout, I don't know how if it would have been more compelling. I think this way, every episode that we switched on, I did not know where we were going to go, and that was kind of most of what was so exciting about digging into this show. And you're so right, Natasha Lyonne as Charlie Cal, she is the anchor. So as long as she's doing her thing, I felt kind of like in safe hands and just was happy to go along for the ride. She is so droll, confident, funny. There's just something about it. There's no one like her. When you're editing her performances, what are you most drawn to when you're watching her do her thing?
I mean, whenever we deal with any performances, even if it's heightened, we want it to be believable. So it's just really going, which of these performances, and the thing about Natasha that's so amazing is you could get 5 different performances, but they'd all be believable. But the key is, if something's heightened, you still have to believe that character believes everything that they're saying, and there's not a false moment. So it's, with editing, it's really about calibrating everything, as far as like, you never want the audience to go, wait, I'm watching a show. And you want it to be like, I'm living this episode. So even if the drummer from Rest in Metal is heightened, he believes he is that character. You believe that he is that crazy guy. And there's a certain moment in that episode where he says, I just let things just roll off my shoulders. And you just see he actually has tons of pain under the surface, and he puts on this persona. So it's all about trying to reveal the subtext of these characters, their internal life, and having it subtly come out through their expressions, through their inflections and through their eyes.
I just find this so fascinating to me because it's like science and art. There's like with editing, I feel like I understand what editors are trying to achieve, but because I'm not in the editing room on the software, I can't quite pinpoint how you calibrate and how you curate a sequence of shots to get an emotion or to ratchet up tension or to make us feel, embarrassed or whatever it may be. So can you try to put it into layman's terms for dummies like me as to how are you curating a sequence of shots depending on the mood? Is it just organic, or do you have a pretty favored rhythm for certain genres or certain styles?
I mean, it all goes back to the script. So what I'll do when I'm approaching a scene, I'll read that scene and I'll try to think about what is this scene trying to say? What is the essence? Because a lot of times characters don't say what they're thinking. There's these subtle lies that people tell to create drama in a scene. So how can we sort of get at the subtext without overtly pushing it into something that becomes broad or crossing that line? And so after I read the scene, then I think about what is that scene telling me? And then it's all about looking at the different performances and having them sort of lead me from what my perceptions of that scene were, and having those performances sort of tell me where to go. And sometimes if I'm not getting a performance that I want from a scene, then it becomes a little bit more tricky about, okay, maybe I need to be playing the scene on this other person's reaction and letting it land on them. And then sometimes as an audience, it's all about what the audience also needs, because sometimes you're withholding information and sometimes you want them to know exactly what's happening, especially in a Rian Johnson show, because it's all about these little breadcrumbs, but never being overt with it, but making sure that the audience knows where they are and that they feel like they're in safe hands every step of the way.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it, because I tell you, when really good editing, I find I don't notice it. And I mean, that's like a double-edged sword for you guys, because you don't want to be it's so obvious, but of course you want good editing to be recognized as well. But I do recognize bad editing. I must say, like, if something's not very well thought through in terms of the scene and shot structure, it's very noticeable and jarring. And as you say, it puts me out of the story and then I'm watching it from the outside. I want to be immersed in it. And that's how I felt about Poker Face and so many other great shows this season. Let's do a bit of a deep dive. You edited episodes 2, 4, and 10. They're all super strong. I must say, I have like 3 or 4 favorite episodes if I had to choose. 2 of those are yours, 2 and 10.
Awesome.
Especially 2, because that's when I really, the second episode, that's when it really hooked me. I was like, oh, this show is special. Hong Chow is so good in episode 2. It's very unpredictable. Amazing. Yeah, and it's so perfectly paced. And that was what one of my main takeaways from the episode. What were you most proud of with the night shift episode 2?
Well, that was the last episode that I actually cut on the show.
Really?
And Ryan directed that episode.
Yeah.
And at that point, I had worked with Ryan because he was very involved. Once the directors did their pass, he was very involved with the producer cut on everything. So I got a real good sense of who he was as a director by that point. And I kind of understood him really well. And so when he started shooting those things, he just has such a good idea of pace himself. He edited some of his early works like Brick, and he's a very good editor himself. And so he knows how to pace the actors, but then also for me, it was about how can we keep the audience really engaged and then put them off balance? For instance, when Damien and Jeb are on the roof, really sort of not knowing who the killer is at that point, because we don't know, because Damien brought up a knife, maybe he's going to stab, Jed. And so it was really about how we stretch certain things out, then we accelerate it. And when Jed pushes Damien off the roof, we want it to come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And then once he kills him, finally with the crowbar, then we wanted to accelerate it to such a point where we're actually jumping through time, because that's what he's feeling inside. His heart starts racing. So we wanted to actually jump cut from these different places to make it feel like you're in the subconscious of the character who we're following at that point.
That is so sophisticated to me, because I didn't feel it was bait and switch or unearned. I felt every moment of that episode was so totally earned, and yet I did not see it coming. That's a very, very tricky line for you guys to walk. It's interesting that you say Rian Johnson directed that particular episode. He directed the first one, the second one, I think. He might have done one other one. I can't remember.
He did not 9 as well.
That's right. 9. And I did really love 9 as well.
Yeah, that was fantastic too.
These episodes are really good. But with 10, that is the hook. It's more action-packed as the cat and mouse game kind of culminates in Cliff and Charlie coming to a head, and she ends up back in Sterling Sr.'s clutches. There's a lot packed in that episode. I remember after watching it, I looked it up, and I'm like, oh, of course, Janixa Bravo directed that one.
Janixa is fantastic.
She is phenomenal. I interviewed her for Zola, and she's such a talent. It's interesting how different directors bring a different vibe, and yet you're still having to, you're working with them, but you've got your own style. So talk me through what you were most proud of with the hook.
Well, Hook was really fun, especially at the beginning, because we don't know what Cliff's journey has been up to this point.
Yeah.
So now we're going to, right after we have this really intense scene with a character, Sterling, who we have felt, but we've never seen him. Now we're going to introduce him. We've heard his voice, but we've never seen him. And then after he gives Cliff, bring me Charlie Cale, then it was really fun going, let's pull different pieces of different episodes, and also we actually use some blue screens in order to put Cliff at these different locations. So that was a lot of fun. And for that, Ryan found an amazing piece of music. I think it's from the 20s, and it's almost like this march. And so it's really fun hearing this sort of 20s march as Cliff has to do this job that he hates and he's miserable about. So that was really fun. But the other thing that was really clever about that episode, and also really difficult, was when Charlie first meets Sterling, they sit and they talk for like 8 minutes at a table. And it really pushes you as an editor to try to keep it interesting and moving when you have two people just talking at a table. Because when you have a lot of camera movement and when you have a lot of different angles, it's much easier. And if the characters are moving, to create tension and to create pace. But when two people are sitting, it's all about their performances, their eyes, what they're saying, what they're not saying, what Cliff is doing in the background, how he's reacting. And so that was really fun to calibrate. And then to have this surprise of she opens up the box and there's a gun. And then very quickly, the whole idea was lights go out, boom, Sterling's dead. So we then wanted to really accelerate the pace to make it feel like Charlie felt very comfortable. You want her and the audience to feel like, oh, she survived this. And then boom, she's not. she's on the run. So it was all about playing that.
Yeah, I love that. Then also Rest in Metal, episode 4. You mentioned the drummer, that's Nicholas Cirillo, who plays Gavin, and great performance, but I really, really enjoyed Chloe Sevigny in this one. She could be one of the many guest stars who gets an Emmy nomination this season, for her performance.
Chloe was fantastic. I
So
love
fantastic.
cutting her.
Oh,
And it's a tough part because she really needs to be
I
a
know.
nasty person,
Yeah.
but there's humanity too. And some of the times she reads it, you really feel that she feels like she's been dealt a bad card, and she really deserves this.
Yeah, there's a lot of music in this as well, a lot of percussion. Obviously, it's a rock band. Technically speaking, is that difficult to cut, or is that something that happens in post once you've already edited it to fix it or pull the sound?
Performance stuff is difficult, especially because sometimes you have musicians who aren't real musicians. Now in this, I wish I could remember it, but the guy who plays the bass player, he wrote all the music. And
Right.
yeah, and
I think it's GK Ume as Eski.
no, Eski is I'm sorry, I'm talking about the other character. Yeah, you're right.
Doesn't
Eski.
matter, but we know who you're talking about. Yeah.
So anyway, he wrote the music, and so Eski, I think he does play, but everyone did play pretty well. But Gavin, sometimes he wouldn't drum exactly on the beats, so it's really difficult to go, okay, they're performers as actors, but we also have to make them believable as musicians. And so that's always a tricky thing. And then that last performance was tricky because we want it to be about Charlie trying to escape Cliff, but we need enough to make it feel like this band has now gotten to the point where they are the best. They are now wowing the crowd, and that Sucker Punch is going to become a huge hot single. It's actually really catchy.
Yeah,
and it's actually a really good song, and and it's hilarious. Spoiler alert that it's the theme to Benson, but knowing when to go to the stage and when to stay on Charlie and Cliff, and to keep the threat of that was really kind of a lot of fun and very complicated in order to calibrate.
It's that's so good. It's interesting that on this show there are, I think, 4 editors, and obviously that usually happens on shows for practical reasons. You just simply can't edit everything. It's interesting as well that there was such a consistent style throughout the show. There's this nostalgia, as I mentioned earlier, these tonal shifts. I found it so compelling, and so now we're all desperate for season 2 to start production. So I assume that if they're in production, that you will join the show again, right? If you're asked.
Yes, I would love to work on season 2 of Poker Face. It was just such a joy. Everybody through the whole crew was fantastic. The other editors, Shahid and Paul and Bob, were fantastic to work with, and it was just a huge joy. Ryan is incredible. Ram is wonderful. Nora, they're just all fantastic, and I just felt really blessed to be a part of it, and I just can't wait for season 2.
Same. And finally, I suspect Poker Face is going to do quite well at the Emmys this year. Well, that's the hope, at least, for a variety of categories. You, unfortunately, mate, you've got a really Sophie's choice here, because you've got to pick one episode. You've done 3.
I know.
Great. I'm not going to put you on the spot. I know you're still deciding, but that's a good thing. It's a good problem to have, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. I have been going back and forth about which episode to submit, because I do feel like they are all really fantastic in their own way. Like you said, there's one thing about 2 that I really am proud about, and that is that pace-wise, it just is so well calibrated, and I just feel very blessed that episode, all of the episodes turned out great. But also 10 is a lot of fun too, because it takes you to so many different places, and it's so beautifully directed by Janexa. And I just, having Natasha and Rian, it's just, you couldn't ask for more from a show. And it's just was a pure joy.
Well, thank you for your time today, Glenn. Good luck at the Emmys. Hopefully you get nominated. And if not, it doesn't matter because we're all now talking about Poker Face and particularly your amazing episodes. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Rob. Really appreciated this. This was fantastic.